A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macedon. Episode 51, Last Night in Macedon. Midnight, October 7th, 368 BCE, the royal encampment, Aegae. The night before the Theban delegation was set to depart, the air over Aegae was heavy, with a cold, damp mist that clung to the canvas of the royal tents like a shroud. The great tumulus was now a silent, dark silhouette against the stars, the fire of the pyre reduced to a memory of gray ash, and the lingering, cloying scent of resin. "It smells like the end of everything," Philip thought, his lungs tightening as he breathed in the stagnant air. The funeral is over, but the burial of our sovereignty has only just begun. Inside the small tent assigned to the princes, a single oil lamp flickered, throwing long, jagged shadows against the fabric walls. This was the last hour of the old world. Tomorrow, Philip would cross the border as a hostage, and Perdiccas would return to Pella as a king who wore a crown of thorns, a ruler with a title but no authority, a figurehead in a kingdom governed by his father's murderer. Perdiccas sat on the edge of a low cot, his fingers nervously tracing the frayed edge of his mourning cloak. The scent of funeral incense still clung to the wool, a suffocating reminder of what had been stolen from them. He looked at the small cedar chest containing Philip's meager belongings, a few tunics, a hunting knife, and the secret skytail bond hidden beneath the lining. He looked so small, Perdiccas thought, a wave of hollow, aching dread washing over him. I'm the king, yet I'm sending my own blood into the lion's den to buy a few more months of breathing room. I'm not a protector. I'm a merchant selling pieces of my own family. They will call you a captive, Philip, Perdiccas whispered, his voice cracking, raw with a grief that hadn't yet settled into the earth. They will whisper that we are weak, he added to himself, the fear of the coming shame burning hotter than his sorrow. They will say the Argead fire has been quenched. Let them call me what they wish, Philip answered, his eyes fixed on the flickering shadows as if reading a map of the future. Let them underestimate me, he thought, a cold, hard resolve settling into the pit of his stomach. Perdiccas sees a humiliation. I see a library of destruction. I will learn their tactics, I will master their formations, and I will watch them reveal the secrets of their own obsolescence. A captive sees the bars of his cage. A student sees the architecture of the prison, Philip continued, his voice steady, stripped of the cadence of a boy. I am not going there to be broken. I'm going to dismantle them from the inside out. When I return, the walls of the Cadmea will not be a sanctuary for me. They will be the blueprints for Thebes' ruin. I am not going there to sit in a cellar, Perdiccas, Philip said, turning to look at his brother with eyes that seemed to have aged a decade in the span of an hour. I'm going to the house of Pamines. I'm going to sit at the feet of Epaminondas. And when I stand up, Philip vowed in the silence of his own mind, the world will finally understand why the Argead bloodline does not survive, it conquers. Perdiccas stood and walked to his brother, placing his hands on Philip's shoulders. He was the elder now, the one who was supposed to be the shield, the wall between his family and the wolves, yet beneath his palms, he felt only his own trembling. My hands have betrayed me, Perdiccas thought, his stomach churning with the sickening sensation of vertigo. I'm trying to offer strength, yet I am a hollow vessel. I'm supposed to be the pillar of this house, but I can feel the stones shifting beneath me, ready to collapse at the slightest pressure. He felt like a man standing on a crumbling cliff, watching the sea swallow the earth beneath his feet, knowing he was the next thing to be claimed by the tide. I still look for him, Perdiccas murmured, his head dropping slightly, the armor of his royal composure fracturing completely. When the tent flap moves, when a horse neighs by the guard post. I think it's him. I think it's Alexander. I keep waiting for him to walk in, laughing, throwing his muddy hunting cloak on the table, telling us it was all a terrible jest. If I turn around now, will he be there? The thought was a desperate, childish delusion that he couldn't quite extinguish. He was larger than life. How can death be quiet enough to take him? Death should have wrestled him, beaten him fair. To have him extinguished like a guttering candle, it makes a mockery of his greatness. He swallowed hard, his voice dropping into a ragged whisper. It doesn't feel real, Philip. The throne room still smells of his oil. The bolster on the seat is still shaped by his weight. It is still warm from him, And yet outside, they've already swept his bones from the pyre and locked his ashes into a cold clay jar. How can a king vanish so fast? How do we just move on from a titan? Philip didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened until the bone showed white beneath his skin. He's trying to make me see the loss, Philip realized, watching his brother's grief. He wants me to acknowledge the void. But if I look into that void, I will drown, and if I drown, Ptolemy wins. I cannot afford his luxury of tears. His eyes, reflecting the dying oil lamp, were entirely devoid of tears, not from a lack of grief, but because the grief had already been hammered into iron. Grief is a waste of time. It is a lethargy of the soul that the Regent is counting on. Every moment I spend mourning is a moment I'm not learning how to kill. We don't move on, Philip said, his voice flat, steady, and terrifyingly mature for his years. We build over him. Alexander was too loud, brother. Too brave. He ruled as if his blood were made of starlight, believing that an Argead crown made him immortal. Ptolemy didn't just kill him, he proved him wrong. He showed us that a crown doesn't make you a god, it only makes the target bigger. He lived for the applause of the court, Philip mused, a phantom of disdain flitting across his thoughts. He wanted to be loved by the people and feared by the nobles, but he forgot that the Regent only cared for the ledger. He died because he was a spectacle. I will be an instrument. Philip reached up, slowly but firmly removing Perdiccas' shaking hands from his shoulders, holding his brother's wrists instead. He needs a command, Philip thought, his grip tightening to force the trembling to stop. He needs to see that even if our house is burning, there is one stone that will not melt. Look at me, Philip commanded softly. Alexander died because he trusted the shadow he cast. He thought no one would dare strike the king. You cannot afford that pride. Mourn him in the dark, Perdiccas. Weep for him when you are alone in your bed. But when the sun rises, you must be the ghost he left behind, quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous. I am the ghost of his mistake, Philip thought, his own resolve hardening into a cold, singular purpose. And I will make Ptolemy fear the silence of a shadow far more than he ever feared the roar of a king. And what of our half-brothers? Perdiccas' grip tightened on Philip's shoulders, his voice dropping to a panicked, hurried hiss. Archelaus, Argead, Menelaus, they aren't mourning. They look at Ptolemy and they see a man who clears paths. Will they stay on our side, Philip? Or will they flip to the Regent the moment Ptolemy offers them a piece of the borderlands? He sees betrayal everywhere, Philip thought, watching the flicker of instability in Perdiccas' eyes. He's right to fear them, but he is wrong to think they have the stomach for a true gamble. They are hungry, yes, but they are scavengers who will only eat the kill once the lion is dead. They will flip, Philip said, his voice dropping into a register that was chillingly calm. Because they are sons of Amyntas' second wife, and they want what is ours. They think Ptolemy is their shield. They don't see that a usurper only keeps rivals alive until he doesn't need them anymore. Watch them, Perdiccas. Smile at them, but treat them like vipers in the thatch. Like vipers, Philip mused, feeling a cold detachment. Vipers don't need to be fought, they just need to be stepped on at the right moment. I will leave them to their ambition, for their greed will eventually make them sloppy, and I will be the one to profit from their mistakes. Ptolemy will watch me every hour, Perdiccas said, his breathing shallow. Every cup of wine I drink, every decree I sign, he will be over my shoulder. I'm a king with no army and a mother who speaks in riddles. How am I to hold this house together while you are 400 miles away? He is already drowning, Philip noted, his resolve sharpening. If he breaks now, the regency will consume everything. I have to be his anchor, even from a distance. I have to be the voice in his head that refuses to let him give up. By being the king he expects, Philip answered, his voice low and lethal. Be the boy who worries about his horses and his hounds. Let him think you are soft. Let him think the death of Alexander broke your spirit. But every night, when the guards are asleep, you remember this. I am learning how to break him. Philip reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, jagged shard of bronze, a fragment of Alexander's armor he had salvaged from the cooling ash of the pyre. It was still stained with the smoke of their brother's final hours. The smell of him, Philip thought, the sharp metallic scent triggering a surge of raw, focused rage. This is not just metal. This is the reminder that Ptolemy's hand is stained with our blood. He took Perdiccas' hand and pressed the metal into his palm until it drew a tiny bead of blood. "We are the last of Amyntas," Philip breathed, looking directly into Perdiccas' brimming eyes. "We are the last, and we are the only ones who can possibly survive this purge. Thebes will teach me the spear. You must learn the court. Do not let him kill you, brother. Stay alive until I return. I don't care what you have to promise him or whose hand you have to shake. Just stay alive." Perdiccas' chest heaved, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "And what of mother? And our sister? You think Ptolemy's ambition stops with the sons? He sleeps in our father's bed, Philip. He watches mother like a hawk circling a wounded wolf. I see how he looks at her when he thinks no one is watching. She is his next prey. He wants her broken, or he wants her gone, so he can cement his bloodline without her shadow looming over the palace. He thinks he has caged the wolf," Philip thought, a dark, thin smile tracing his lips. He has no idea that the wolf is currently sharpening her teeth on his own reputation. Mother is not a victim, she's a furnace. Philip's grip on Perdiccas' wrist tightened until it bruised. "Then you do not know our mother," he whispered, his voice dropping into a register of profound, chilled reverence. "Ptolemy thinks he is the hunter because he holds the spear. He doesn't see the thread tied around his neck. Mother isn't hiding in her quarters weeping, Perdiccas. She and our sister are weaving the shroud he will wear. They are orchestrating the entire court from behind his own shadow. But if he discovers what they are doing," Perdiccas faltered, the sheer vulnerability of their position crashing down. "If he finds out she is coordinating the factions against him from the dark, then she dies, and we die with her," Philip said flatly. "There is no room for hesitation in this gamble. If the thread snaps, we are all undone, but the risk is the only thing that gives us a path to the throne. That is the game we inherited. They are playing their part to keep the regency from swallowing us whole. Our sister is her eyes. Mother is the mind. They are holding the floor beneath your feet, while Ptolemy tries to pull it away. You must be their armor, Perdiccas. Shield them by appearing helpless. Let Ptolemy believe he has won the Queen Mother. Let him believe he has mastered the women of the house, while they quietly bleed him dry of allies." Perdiccas nodded, a grim new light flickering through his tears. He closed his hand over the bronze shard, the blood staining the metal. "I will be here when you march back. I will protect them. I will hold the gates of Pella for you, even if I have to hold them with my bare bones." He will hold, Philip thought, a grim pride overcoming his disdain. "He is not the king I wanted, but he is the king who will survive long enough for me to return." A heavy thud sounded outside, the sharp, metallic butt of a Theban dory striking the frozen earth. The summons, Philip realized, the sound echoing like a drumbeat of war. "The cage is opening, and I am walking into it on my own terms." The brothers shared one last, fierce embrace, the kind of hug given by men who do not know if they will ever see the sun rise on the same horizon again, bound by a blood oath born in the ashes of a murdered king. Philip pulled back, adjusted his heavy traveling cloak, and picked up his cedar chest. "The next time we speak," Philip said, stepping toward the tent flap, his silhouette cutting sharp against the incoming fog, "it will be in a language Ptolemy doesn't understand. The language of the phalanx. And that language will be spoken in blood," Philip promised himself as the cold night air rushed in to meet him. "Ptolemy has turned me into a student of war, but he forgot that a student eventually surpasses his master." He stepped out into the mist, where the iron statues of the Theban sacred band waited to swallow him into exile. Behind him, Perdiccas stood entirely alone in the dark, watching his brother vanish into the southern night, clutching a shard of bronze, a palm full of blood, and the terrifying weight of a kingdom. The night at the Piraeus was a velvet abyss, breathing with the rhythmic slap of the Aegean against the weathered hulls of the triremes. Above, the full moon hung like a silver drachma, casting a shimmering, bruised light across the water. Menander leaned against the cool stone of the pier, his chest rising and falling in the damp air. His body ached, a deep, marrow-level exhaustion born of the long days in the subterranean clinics. The image of the ward haunted him, the gaunt faces, the rattling breath of those teetering on the threshold of the Styx, and the hollow eyes of those who had already slipped away. "We are pulling them back one by one," he thought, pressing his palms against his eyes. It is agonizingly slow, a war against entropy itself. But every heartbeat recovered as a crack in the old, broken order. He felt the weight of his mission, not just the healing of bodies, but the slow, patient sewing together of a shattered society. A soft crunch of gravel broke his reverie. A figure emerged from the shadows of the dockyards, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that commanded the space around him. He was perhaps 30, his shoulders broad and corded with the muscle of a man who worked with iron and cedar, his tunic clinging to him in a way that spoke of labor and raw, unbridled vitality. "It's a beautiful full moon, isn't it?" the stranger said. His voice was a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the humid air. He stepped into the moonlight, close enough for Menander to catch the scent of him, sea salt, pine resin, and the primal, intoxicating musk of a man who spent his life wrestling with wood and wave. It was a scent that felt stifling, almost suffocating, yet it pulled at Menander's senses like a tide. "It is," Menander replied, his voice barely a whisper. He found himself unable to look away from the man's eyes. They were dark, unreadable, and held a gentle, disarming warmth. There was no arrogance in his stance, no performative posturing or judgmental glare. He was simply terrifyingly at ease. "I am Demetrius," the man said, a corner of his mouth curving into an irresistible, knowing smile. "And you, Menander?" Demetrius tilted his head, his gaze sharpening with a sudden, thoughtful intensity. "Menander, Manos, force, strength, spirit, wrath, and aner, man. The strength of a man, a resolute man. It suits you, though you look far more like a man of spirit than a man of wrath tonight." Menander felt the blood rush to his face, warmed by the man's intimate deconstruction of his own identity. He stepped a fraction closer, the moon casting sharp shadows across Demetrius's face. "So what of your own name, then? What burden does it carry?" Demetrius chuckled, a deep, rhythmic sound that seemed to vibrate through the wood of the pier beneath them. "Mine is a more grounded weight. Demetrius, follower of Demeter. It is a name of status and civic duty, fitting for a man who spends his days managing the Neoria and tethering the fleet to the shore." He allowed his gaze to linger on Menander's lips before tracing the line of his jaw with a lingering, focused intensity. "What are you up to tonight? Just cooling your skin in the sea breeze?" "My day was heavy," Menander confessed, his defenses thinning. "I needed to edge the blade of the world off my shoulders before the night deepened." Demetrius leaned in, his eyes dancing with a mix of amusement and invitation. "I thought you were cruising here. I assume you are confessing, then? You are cruising here to seek a companion for the night?" Menander didn't pull back. "And you? You smell of the shipyard. You aren't merely a laborer, are you?" "I watch the sea," Demetrius replied, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial lilt. "I handle the day-to-day management of the shipyards, the dry docks, the Neoria. I build the spine of Athens." Menander's eyes widened. "You are one of the Epimelete Neorian? The commissioners who oversee the very birth of our fleet?" Demetrius chuckled. "Democracy is a messy, demanding beast, and she requires a great many ships to keep her fed. I'm simply the one who ensures the timber is seasoned and the hulls are tight." "What do you do, Menander?" "You have the hands of a man who labors, but the eyes of a man who carries heavy burdens." "I save lives," Menander said softly. "I coordinate the work. We have a physician from Cyrene, a remarkable woman named Lysander. Without her skill and knowledge, we would be lost in the dark." Demetrius watched him, the strange warmth in his eyes deepening. A resolute man tending to the broken, and a follower of Demeter building the tools of war. "It seems we are both trying to keep Athens from crumbling in our own way." "You are absolutely irresistible," Menander blurted out, the admission slipping past his lips before he could call it back. Demetrius stepped into his space, the warmth of his body a physical force. He looked at Menander, his eyes tracing the line of his mouth with a hunger that made Menander's breath hitch. "And you," Demetrius whispered, his voice a promise, "are quite dangerous to a man's composure." He moved with a sudden, deliberate grace, closing the final inch between them. His lips brushed against Menander's, soft and demanding, a kiss that tasted of salt and the secret quiet promise of the night. Menander leaned into him, the world of the dying and the broken dissolving into nothingness, leaving only the rhythm of the tide and the heat of a stranger turned savior. It had been many long years since Menander had felt anything resembling this. It crystallized only after he realized his divine mission: to save a broken world, to salvage abandoned souls, and to restore to them the lives they deserved. It was a relentless, punishing pursuit defined by trial and error, yet now it had begun to lurch forward toward his vision, his true life purpose, his fulfillment, his enlightenment. He was walking a path that led toward the gods and goddesses of a divine realm he unconditionally believed in. His crusade to save others was, in truth, his own salvation, an escape from life's crushing uncertainty. Though born to a house of wealth where he never had to struggle for mere survival, that very ease had somehow become a burden. Witnessing the suffering of those around him, a misery he had never personally endured, forced a staggering realization. Human life was fragile, fleeting, and seemingly dictated by random, cruel occurrences. True equality did not exist. Whether at the top, the bottom, or somewhere in between, life was fractured. Even the pinnacle of Athenian society cast a dark shadow, deeply rotted by greed, blinding pride, and systemic prejudice. At the height of their supreme hierarchy, the elite were blinded by arrogance, draped in high pride and intellectual narcissism. On the surface, they appeared successful, intellectual, and enlightened as they looked down upon the masses below. They touted their ideal of democracy, a system where the Athenians used random selection, a process called sortition or allotment, for the vast majority of their government jobs. They believed that elections favored the rich and were therefore oligarchic, whereas a lottery gave every citizen an equal chance to rule and be ruled. Through this mechanism, the Council of 500, known as the Bull, managed the day-to-day business of the state and set the agenda for the public assembly, with members chosen annually by lot from across Athens. Similarly, hundreds of civil servants, tax inspectors, market wardens, and administrative officials were chosen by lot using mechanical allotment machines called clariteria, while law court juries, often consisting of 501 men or more, were entirely chosen by lot every day to prevent bribery and corruption. Not everything was left to chance, however. The Athenians realized that random chance could result in an incompetent person commanding an army or managing state finances. Because of this, military generals like Pericles and top financial officials were elected, not randomly chosen, as the Athenians wanted the ability to vote out or put on trial anyone who messed up a military campaign. Furthermore, the process relied on self-selection, where one was never forced into office. Only citizens who put their names forward entered the lottery pool. Once drawn, they had to pass a screening known as docomasia, a background check proving they were legal citizens, tax-compliant, and free of criminal records. With strict term limits where most allotted jobs lasted only a year and could rarely be held twice, power cycled constantly through the population. The Athenians absolutely called their system democracy or demokratia, which literally translates to people power. Crucially, however, the Athenians viewed sortition as the most important and truly democratic way of practicing that power. To the Athenians, elections were seen as aristocratic or oligarchic because they favored the wealthy, the famous, and the powerful, those who could afford to campaign or influence voters. They believed that letting people vote for a leader gave an advantage to elites, whereas a random lottery gave every ordinary citizen an equal chance to serve, embodying true equality known as isonomia. Yet Menander saw the dark, ironic truth beneath their proud civic machinery. Technically, this very system of democracy had made Athens itself profoundly corrupt. By placing absolute faith in sortition and mob rule, they had created an environment where the structures meant to prevent abuse invited something far more insidious. The massive, randomly selected juries were easily swayed by silver-tongued demagogues and emotional rhetoric rather than justice, turning the courts into weapons for personal vendettas. The wealthy still dominated through behind-the-scenes influence, buying popularity by financing state fleets, while the assembly lurched from one volatile, greed-driven crisis to the next. Because sortition prevented professional governance and elevated the whims of the crowd, the state had essentially institutionalized its own rot, leaving a supposedly enlightened society utterly blind to the spiritual decay eating away at its core. Menander's devotion to reshaping his world burned with a clarity that ignored the shifting tides of Athenian politics. He did not care for the power plays that manipulated the vulnerable. His mission was to salvage the abandoned, men, women, and all those who existed in the forgotten spaces between. To him, every Athenian deserved a form of equality that transcended the state's hollow political man-wevers, especially those marginalized by the rigid, arrogant male dominance that defined the city. Whether in the militaristic fervor or the geopolitical arena, the Athenians projected a facade of glory, desperate to cling to the illusion of their own supremacy, even as they crumbled from within. But Menander knew this greatness was a mere delusion, a crumbling monument to a pride that had long since soured. Beneath the marble surfaces and the polished rhetoric, the reality was bleak. Above the surface, the darkness was even more pervasive, festering with a rot that permeated everything. It was not just their institutions that had decayed, but their minds, their bodies, and their very souls. He saw it all as a grotesque sickness that demanded a radical surgical dissection. He felt a divine compulsion to peel back the layers of their filth, to purge the rot with drastic measures, and to sanitize the corruption that had turned their brilliance into decay. Only through such a brutal cleansing process could he hope to heal their inner wounds, forcing them at last to realize what true equality meant and to finally serve their gods and ancestors with the purity that the Golden Realm demanded. Then, out of the shadows of that suffocating world, came a quiet, blinding shift. Menander realized that Demetrius's touch, his hands exploring his body with a relentless, anchoring presence, his warm breath and wet, searching tongue, tracing a path from Menander's neck to his ear, had stripped away every vestige of his sensory overload. In that close, breathless intimacy, Demetrius made him temporarily forget the crushing burdens of reality, the dark, filthy subterranean tunnel of his mission, and the endless darkness he had grown so accustomed to fading away inside. It felt heavenly to surrender to this man, a total stranger who offered a fierce, staggering kindness and a rare, illuminating gentleness. Menander knew from the way Demetrius cared for him as a human being, not treating him as a sexual toy to be used and discarded, nor abusing him with the tyrannical commands of a master forcing obedience like a harsh husband ruling over a battered wife and children. Demetrius lacked that unconscious cruelty entirely. Instead, his hands and lips moved with an intuitive hunger, eagerly learning every contour of Menander's skin to find the exact places that coaxed forth his gasps, his flutters, and his softest moans, entirely devoted to the meticulous, reverent attention he paid to every inch of him. To be continued in episode 52-2, Ecstasis and the Divine Comedy. A Great Argead Saga Alexein. Volume 1, Telesias, the War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 30-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our Vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below.